Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 310 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Today I'm delighted to catch up with Dr Sonja Falck, who is a UKCP accredited psychotherapist and supervisor and also a BACP senior accredited practitioner. She has a Bachelor of Social Sciences with honours in clinical psychology from the University of Cape Town, a master's degree in psychoanalysis with distinction from Middlesex University. She's a doctor of psychotherapy by professional studies gained through the Metonia Institute. She's an author of a number of books and she's currently senior lecturer, Department of Professional Psychology at the University of East London. Today, Dr. Falck is going to talk about the importance of personal development groups to a qualified practitioner.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Rory and myself, Ken, are absolutely delighted to welcome you to episode 310 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where today we're going to be covering three topics that we know are going to be interesting to you, starting off with our ethical, sustainable practice, where today we're going to be looking at relational depth and healing trauma clients. So it's a relational depth really related to trauma clients and how we build that and what the benefits of that are. We then go into our practice matters. Rory's already done a beautiful intro of Dr. Sonja Falck discussing the importance of personal development groups to qualified practitioners, and we're going to be dipping into that. And then student services today. We look at you, our students. We recognize you on your journey. on your journey, and today we're going to be speaking about getting your reading list in order. If you're listening in real time, there's never going to be a better time to get a reading list for your upcoming studies as we kind of go into the new academic year, if you are listening in real time. But this is it. It's episode 310 of your favorite podcast, the Counselling Tutor Podcast, kicking off, Rory, with relational depth, healing traumatised clients. What can you tell us?
Well, I think the first thing I can say with a degree of confidence is that we see more trauma in the therapy room than ever before. Or another way of looking at it, it now has a name. I think once we have a vocabulary for things, it becomes more apparent. And I think trauma is something that's come into the consciousness of people, and not only the word itself, but also how it represents in people. And we know that when people are traumatized, it's not just a dysregulation of our thinking, it's also a dysregulation of our physical being. And this is something that's become more and more apparent through the years with people like Bressa van der Kolk, who has written enormous amounts of information on how the body reacts to trauma. Trauma is embedded in the body. So it's really, really important that when we meet clients that are traumatized, we understand that this is what we're offering is an holistic approach, that we're working with their thought processes and their experience, but also we're understanding that experience and that trauma is embedded in their bodies, and we can help them with that to a certain degree. And I think what is most important, and I was just reading this morning in preparation for our chat, Ken, is that offering compassion. And I think the thing is that people forget what compassion means. Compassion means, it's Latin, it means self and suffering. And as a consequence of that, we have to empathically sometimes suffer with the client.
Wow. That is very, very profound, Rory. And I guess we're speaking today about relational depth and how important that is in working in with trauma. And like you say, Rory, I mean, it starts with that level of compassion and truly, truly being there. Those are kind of the stepping stones of relational depth. I want to share a definition of relational depth that we have here. The importance of the therapeutic relationship. This is Cooper, 2005, and defines relational depth as a state of profound contact and engagement between two people in which each person is fully real and the other is able to understand the value of the other's experience at a high level. And I think that is, I like that definition. It's very, very beautiful. And if we look to, I guess, the theory of person-centered counseling, one of the conditions for facilitative change requires us as the counselors to be congruent or real within the relationship. But there's also a suggestion that maybe the client will be in a state of incongruence, as they're not fully real within the relationship at times. And I'm putting in at times because relational depth, it really is, it's that magical, almost undescribable being in the flow where you both meeting. It's humanity meeting humanity. It's a very real and a very deep connection, and really, really valuable if we're working with trauma, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, when we start to work with clients with trauma, we're working really beyond empathy. We're moving into a realm, a phenomenological realm, where we're experiencing the clients at a number of levels and a number of points, and I can't emphasize enough that part of relational depth is moving with the client. It's almost like a piece of music where you have two instruments and they play in harmony, and one instrument plays slightly behind the lead instrument. And that's exactly what happens, I think, when we work with trauma, certainly at relational depth. So, if the client is sad, we respond with a voice that shows that sadness. If the client laughs, then again, we respond with that. If the client feels joy at something, a breakthrough maybe, we reflect that joy. And, that speaks to that unconditional positive regard, which just isn't in person-centered therapy. I was reading some work on Heinz Kohut, and he was saying much the same thing, that we meet with unconditional positive regard. We meet the client where they are and work with who they are and their experiences. And it shouldn't be underestimated, the power of that deep listening, the quality of the listening. And this is something that's emphasized time and time again, not only in the literature, but in a lot of the therapists and the colleagues I've spoken to. The quality of the listening, the quality of the responses is so, so important, because that person is sharing a incredibly difficult part of their existence with another. And you have to be there. You have to be willing to absorb what's being said, both emotionally and physically. In some cases, it can be a physicality, and provide that, as Roger said, that soil of a different kind for the client to be able to reorganize themselves, to be able to put themselves back together internally and emotionally, and to go on into the world.
Very much so. I love that soil of a different kind. And it is rare indeed. And you were speaking about the quality of the listening, and it just made me smile. I think when I started my studies, if you'd have told me that there was different qualities to actually listening to somebody, I think that I would have gone, oh, come on. But having gone through the training and seen that in action and felt it myself and exercised that myself, it is so, so important. I guess also it comes with practice, and it comes with maturity within your practice, that there are definitely different depths at which we can listen. And as you're speaking about this, we're talking about this relational depth, but I think we need to recognize what trauma is and how it presents. And we've spoken about that because we're kind of running a bit of a season on trauma in our podcast. If you go back on the last few episodes, you're going to hear us speaking about this and defining what trauma is and how that presents itself. But here I want to speak about the enemies to that relational depth, and that would be the disintegration. So trauma causes disintegration of self and of the nervous system regulation within the client. And the other one is the triggers. You know, we spoke about this when we were speaking about neurodivergence, how we would be mindful of potential triggers like a perfume in a room or heavily scented flowers or something like that. Triggers, sensory triggers, smell, sound can cause clients to become and relive trauma, become traumatized and relive that trauma. So what we're looking to do is, first of all, understand those. And rather than that disintegration, which is the enemy of the relational depth, we're looking for integration. And this is aiming to integrate the fragmented parts of the traumatized self and welcome them all into the therapy bubble and hold them all in the therapy bubble. And how do we do that? Well, we do this through an embodied presence. And this is the responsibility of the therapist, this embodied therapist. And you've spoken about it, Rory, because it relates to the quality of the listening. It's about really fully being there. When we're listening to this person, we're listening not just to the words, but we're listening, as is said, to the music behind the words. How is this person holding themselves? What are their eyes doing? What are their hands doing? How is their breathing? How are they presenting as a whole within that? And we can enhance our embodied presence through understanding ourselves, our practice, and what we're looking at. And there's a beautiful exercise in the associated handout, Rory, which speaks about exercises that we can do within the session with the client, where we can really, it's embodiment, practicing embodiment. The first is our posture. Our posture, how are we sitting? Where are our feet? Feet firmly on the ground gives you almost a grounding of self, having your back and feeling your back, being mindful in the moment. I can feel my back on the chair that I'm sitting on right now, Rory, but I have to be mindful and present to be able to feel that. So it's being fully present within in the room. And also, as therapists, we can use breath work to bring ourselves into the here and now. When we want to be fully engaged and right there with that client, just concentrating on how we are breathing, feeling the breath maybe go in and out of our nose. You'd think that it would be a distraction, but it's not. It actually grounds us in the present moment, because you can't be somewhere else if you're watching that breath coming in. And I think that embodiment, it just gives us a few little tools or little techniques that we can use to make sure that we are fully there for the client. And it's really worth going and having a look at the handout. It's a pretty comprehensive article that has been written on this, on relational depth, healing traumatized clients. And there's as always one of Rory's super duper handouts. It's beautifully referenced, so you have additional reading on this. It costs absolutely nothing. And to get it, you just go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our website. Click on the podcast tab, go to episode 310, and you can download that. But what else do we need to kind of keep in mind if we're talking about relational depth? We're talking about traumatized clients. What's kind of important to kind of bring this topic to a close, Rory?
Well, I think that, to work effectively with clients who are presenting with trauma, there's a number of aspects to ourselves that we need to look at. And I think that first of all is that clients will project onto us. They may point fingers and say, people like you I remember supervising someone many years ago who's a female supervisee, and the client said to her, "I've been let down by women like you," and she was kind of knocked back in her seat by that. And I said, coping with that projection and being able to absorb it is so important, because the clients will feel disappointment, they'll feel pain, and they'll project it out. And it's really important that we're very present and very robust in the therapy room. And you spoke about being firm in the chair. What you were talking about, Ken, is being regulated. One person in the room in trauma work has to be fully regulated, and that is that's the therapist. And I also think avoiding rescuing tendencies. I think sometimes, certainly in the early forms of therapy, where clients talking about the story of what might have happened, not trying to jump in and fix. I think it's so important to allow clients to process their trauma without fixing them. Because what happens is if you put a fixing, you effectively discount what they're saying. You say, well, you could try this or you could try that. And what happens is the full story and the full process that they're engaging with is halted. And it needs to move forward. It needs to come out. So avoid, going very quickly in with interventions or fixes. And also managing personal dysregulation. Recognize your process. I have heard some, quite frankly, terrifying stories through my 20 years of being a therapist. And one of the things I was very, very grateful for was personal development, groups that I was in, being able to separate out what was my stuff and what was the client's, but also really, really good supervision to allow me to put a respectful distance between myself and the client for my own well-being. And that really speaks to regulating your own nervous system, speaks to maintaining a stable therapeutic presence. All the literature speaks to the fact that there's two people in that room. One needs to be regulated. One needs to be present and regulated, and that hopefully at all times is the therapist. Because if the two people become dysregulated, then you're going to get two very unwell people. So don't underestimate personal development. Don't underestimate good supervision. And I would say don't underestimate looking at the client load you're taking on and how many traumatized clients you're working with. It's usually good to spread the load out a bit so you're not facing trauma every time.
Thank you, Rory. And if you'd like to read more on this topic, you can go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 310. There's an intensive article, a really deep article, beautifully referenced, and you can download your super duper handout that covers everything that we've spoken about today. And it ends with these final remarks, which I think are very poignant here, Rory. Building a relational depth with a traumatized client requires a deep understanding of trauma, effective embodiment practice, and the ability to navigate complex therapeutic dynamics. And of course, the article covers that. But if you are looking to delve a little bit deeper into working as a trauma-informed practitioner at Counselling Tutor, we do have a certificate course in this very topic. And to find that, you just go to counsellingtutor.com. It's right there. You'll see all of the different courses that we run. We do run a certificate in trauma-informed practice. And that, Rory, brings us to the end of today's ethical, sustainable practice. And we now move on to the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast, where you can kind of listen to this. You're listening to an expert on a specific topic and you can pop it down as CPD. And today, Rory, you had an interview with Dr Sonja Falck, and you were discussing the importance of personal development groups to a qualified practitioner. And, this is a topic really dear to my heart, because I remember when I finished my studies, it was kind of, I left personal development development group that I'd been in for a number of years, and it felt like there was an empty hole. And I often see in our Facebook group, in Counselling Tutor Facebook group, so many people saying, hey, are there any personal development groups that I can join? So it obviously leaves a hole, but it's interesting you kind of delved into what the importance of that is with Sonja.
Absolutely. And, we touched on it in the last section, didn't we, about self-regulation and being present and being robust. And it's something that Dr. Sonja Falck kind of develops in my interview when we met up, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Personal development or process groups are usually a mandatory form of activity in first training. So anybody who's done a level 4 or a degree in counselling may be very familiar with sitting in a circle and engaging in a personal development, or sometimes referred to as process group. For some, it's life-changing, enlightening, and a experience of growth. For others, it can be, and as I speak for someone who's facilitated PD groups for over 10 years, for some it can be a year of looking at their feet. So I am delighted to be speaking to Dr. Sonja Falck, who actually runs personal development groups for professional qualified counsellors. So Dr. Falck, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rory. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, how do professional development groups enhance the skills and knowledge of qualified counsellors? I think for a lot of therapists, certainly training, once they've left the PD group, they kind of maybe breathe a bit of a sigh of relief and then never think about it again, engage in all the other aspects of their professional life, but not the PD group. So what are the benefits of a PD group for a qualified practitioner?
Yeah. Well, as you said, Rory, the experience in PD groups varies enormously. I am the lead for personal development groups at the University of East London. And in our counselling training, which is a 3-year full-time British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy accredited training, PD groups are part of it, and in their final year, students write a reflective essay on what their experience of personal development groups has been throughout their training. And in the last week, I read through the last few years of all these essays and found that some students had, as you say, experienced it as transformative, and some had found it really difficult on a scale of a really negative experience, or just purely a bewildering experience. Like, what is the point? What are we doing this for? And those who had heard from others who had experienced it as transformative, what they'd got from it, those students who'd experienced it in such a good way said it was the best experience of their entire training. It was so rich and so important. And those who hadn't had that experience wrote about how they really regretted that they felt they'd missed out on getting what they really could from that. And so that's the point of offering it to qualified counsellors, so that those who did miss out and didn't have that transformative experience have another opportunity to actually experience the power of a good PD group.
Yes, I think that's an interesting one. Your observations would parallel mine, where my students also did reflective essays, and it was very much the same. Some thought it was transformational, others wondered if they could have been doing something else. I think I had one person who said they could have had another hour to do the ironing. One person said, which was a little. It kind of made my heart a little bit sad, because they'd spent a year thinking he'd wasted the time, and that's never a great thing. Is there any indication to why there's such a split in experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am passionate about PD groups. I find them incredible in all sorts of ways, which I'm happy to talk about. But to get to your point, I think a key question is what makes the difference between it being such a good experience or a boring one, akin to doing your ironing, or a negative one, which even has the risk of causing re-traumatization. So I think that is the key question in running PD groups and offering them. So I think the first thing to say is that being in a group is a very powerful experience. It's in our DNA. Evolutionarily, belonging in a group was much more safe than being on your own. You could help each other find resources. You could protect each other against predators. So it's in our DNA to want to belong in a group, to seek safety and acceptance in a group. And that's why groups are so powerful, because if you do experience acceptance, belonging, safety, it's a powerfully good feeling and gives you an experience of interaction with others and feeling accepted that is more powerful than any other kind of interpersonal experience. And at the same time, it's the most powerfully threatening experience, because if you are going to be disapproved of, rejected, excluded from the group, then research has shown that that gives an experience that is as acute as physical pain, because being rejected is such a primitively frightening experience. So people go into a group with that fear of rejection, and every single time somebody risks saying something in a group setting, they are taking that risk of being rejected, being disapproved of, being excluded, and they fear saying what they really think because they fear those consequences. And when they do risk speaking and they experience actually they're being accepted, people are engaging with them with interest, that gives a powerful rush of positive biochemicals, and also instigates a neural pathway, a strengthening of a neural pathway, so a rewiring of the brain to feel more confident in group settings, to know how to express yourself with others in a way that goes well, and to effectively participate in a group and bring about all those benefits of belonging.
Absolutely. And I guess my next question leads on from that. For a group to experience that, how important is the facilitation of that? What's the ingredient that kind of makes that a kind of group like that really work?
Yeah, really great question. I have distilled down three main aspects. One is clarity, one is safety, and one is skill. So it begins with clarity. It is so important to give students or qualified practitioners, anybody who joins a group, really, really clear guidelines on what is the purpose of this, what are we doing, and how are we going to do it. So there is one book that I've ever found on personal development groups in counselling training by Chris Rose. And in there, the metaphor is used of when you join the group, it's like getting onto a rowing boat, and each person has to pick up their oar and help row the boat. And that's how the group progresses. So people have to be given a metaphor like that to understand how you pick up your oar, how do you row, how do you participate, and what is the purpose, what happens when this works. So clarity is the first one. Safety is the second one. Creating conditions where people start to build trust amongst the other group participants, where they feel that they can take risks and they can express themselves and that nothing disastrous is going to happen. That's really important. It's important to differentiate between safety and discomfort, because having safety in a group doesn't mean that you're never going to feel uncomfortable. to grow and develop, you have to enter a zone where there is some discomfort. But it's safe discomfort. And when you can trust that this is safe, and the first sessions of any group are solely about building safety and trust. And when there is safety, people start to be more courageous and express themselves and interact with each other. And that's when it becomes really rich. And then the third element, skill. So that's skill of the facilitator in helping create safety, helping to ongoingly create clarity, model good interpersonal interactions, and encourage those. And also teach skills to the participants. So a very important skill is regulation. When you feel uncomfortable, when you feel triggered by something somebody else has said, how do you manage that? What skills do you have for looking after yourself in a group? What skills do you have for communicating effectively with each other? So the facilitator needs to themselves have all of those skills and teach those skills, model those skills, so that the group becomes a more and more highly skilled arena for communicating with each other and experimenting with each other.
I mean, I think that is a clear outline of how a PD group should be run, and I get letters occasionally from students who have said that their personal development group is a bit like the Wild West and is a bit like a bar fight rather than something that's developing. I also get letters from neurodivergent counsellors, people who are autistic or maybe state that they're neurodivergent and are confused about what's going on, have a challenge in processing what's going on. Do you have any observations on working with neurodivergent people within a process group?
Yes, absolutely. Because the groups that I have run, we typically will have at least one member who is neurodivergent. And so there's some really important things. I mean, one thing about neurodivergence, which is one of my specialisms in my research area and the books that I've written, is that picking up on social cues and having some sort of natural sense of what the right thing is to say in a situation or how to manage how communication goes. That's often something that doesn't come naturally. So in a PD group, it's a fantastic opportunity for making very explicit, well, when you look like this, another person might be thinking that. When you're very quiet in the group, maybe you being quiet because you're scared and you don't know what to say, but how does the other person experience it? Other people in the group might think that you are rejecting them. You think they're boring. You don't think they're worth having a conversation with, and that's why you're keeping quiet. So actually having that opportunity to really draw attention to what is your behavior, how is the impact on others of that behavior, and what can we do about that when you're sitting there quietly saying nothing? If it's because you're scared of saying something, how can you let us know that? Maybe you can say, you know what, I want to participate, but I don't know what to say. Like, that's a great communication. So what we do in the group is encourage people to share what's actually going on for them. So even just saying, you know what, I'd love to get involved in this conversation, but I don't know how. Or I want to speak, but I'm scared it'll be inappropriate. Or I want to say something, but I'm worried I'll take up too much time. You know, people, neurodivergent or not, always fear that when they speak in a group, they're going to be speaking too much. And so sometimes they err on the side of what feels safer, which is to say nothing. But then that has its impact also. Whether you say something or you don't, you're impacting the people around you. But can we be curious about the impact? And can we make it explicit? So you then have more control over what sort of impact you want to create. And you can say out loud, I'm struggling with this. And then the impact is other people understand where you're at. And actually they reach out to you because they like it that you're being vulnerable, rather than you sitting there being quiet and they think, oh, you're arrogant. And they start turning away from you because they feel that you're critical of them and they sharing, but you're not. And that's unequal.
Yes, I mean, a masterclass in how to run a PD group right there, really. I'm sure there'll be a few tutors making notes, listening to this podcast, writing furiously down and replaying it. What message would you give to maybe qualified practitioners? They've left their practices, they've left their first trainings, and they kind of yearn for that, incredibly powerful environment of a PD group, or they may feel they've missed out. They may be listening to this and thinking, I just wish that I got more out of it. What would you say to that listener?
Yeah, well, first thing I'd say is great to notice that there's something here that could really aid your personal and professional development that you're interested in pursuing. Next step is, how do you find that? So I'm personally running in-person PD groups for qualified practitioners in North London, just by Highgate Underground Station. Lots and lots of people who are listening to this podcast won't find that a location that they can easily get to. But if you want to reach out to me and let me know that you're interested, then, we can always see if we can create more of this happening in more locations as well. So what I've done in my lead of personal development groups at UEL is I've created guidelines for students in how this works and what it's about, and for the facilitators. So if we sort of emulate that model of how to do it well, then, that's something that can be rolled out. But yeah, just reaching out and saying that you'd like to experience this. And then the way to do it is to have a bit of an assessment. So like a conversation where you work out what you'd like to get out of it, sort of where you're at with your experience in groups, and then find a suitable group. So the way to do that, I do groups. I have found that a group membership of 9 participants plus the facilitator makes 10 sitting in the circle is ideal, because more than that, the individuals don't get enough airtime to really express themselves and participate. And fewer than that, you don't get enough interesting diversity that makes it really rich and makes lots of interactions happen. So you want the right number. You also want a good mix of participants, and a very crucial factor is the commitment of the members to participating in the group. So something we did at UEL is we made the 3rd year PD group of the training voluntary, and that was a game changer, because the students who attended that group, it wasn't voluntary as in drop in whenever you feel like it. It was voluntary as in you make a commitment at the start of the academic year to attend weekly. And the students who did that, it made such a difference, because each person wanted to be there and really participated and saw the value of it. And it's similar to individual counselling or psychotherapy, that the success of the therapy is partly the skill of the therapist and partly the motivation and active participation of the client.
Yes, it speaks very strongly to the work of Lambert, I think, and common factors, that kind of magical formula of why it works. I'd just like to pick up on a point, Sonja, if I may.
Sure.
One of the interesting things that I heard you say is that people can't choose to drop in and drop out. What do you think the importance is of having a fixed term for PD groups as opposed to like a rolling, people can come in and come out when they want?
Yeah. Well, I don't know of a PD model in training where people come in and out as they want. It's usually compulsory attendance. And our model that we tried of making the third year voluntary, but it wasn't voluntary drop in and out, it was voluntary, committed, regular weekly attendance. That's how PDs are usually run. With group therapy, which PD obviously has a lot of similarities with, you can either have a closed group where it's fixed term and the people start together, usually as complete strangers to each other, and then they get to know each other and the group comes to an end at a fixed term. Or you have what's called a slow open group, where you start with a membership of the group, and then over time, as somebody leaves the group, somebody else joins. And so you have that sort of ongoing, the group just continues open-ended and people give notice for when they want to leave, and then new people join. There are pros and cons of the different models. A slow open group is amazing in terms of letting people really trust that they can immerse themselves in the group, they can get to know the facilitator, and they can really get working on themselves, and there's no time limit. They know that they can stay involved for as long as the group is important to them and meaningful to them. A fixed time group sometimes causes people to get involved faster because they know there's an end in sight. So there are different ways of thinking about it.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey into personal development groups. It's an area I think that is slightly neglected, certainly as people leave training and go into practice. If anybody out there is interested in the PD groups that Dr. Falck is running, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, look at the podcast tab, episode 310, and we'll put Dr. Falck's details in the show notes page, and you can reach out and contact us. So it just goes for me to say, Dr. Falck, thank you so much for joining us.
Very big thank you to Dr. Sonja Falck. Thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out, holding these interviews and bringing us the CPD in Practice Matters. And we now move out of Practice Matters straight into recognising our students into Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, we're going to be speaking about getting your reading list in order. If you're listening in real time, here in the UK, it is the beginning of the new academic year. It's when you get your reading lists. It's when you kind of look at what the year ahead holds. But the importance of reading lists, Rory.
Yes, well, the reading lists are, for those of you who've never come across a reading list, they're usually an A4 piece of paper, or you may get them emailed nowadays, or they might be on your virtual learning environment. But effectively what they are is a series of textbooks or websites or resources that cover the topics that you'll be studying on your course. And reading lists usually have a standard offering. So, you know, if you were studying person-centered therapy, you may be asked to look at On Becoming a Person or Person-Centered Counselling Action by Tony Merry, two very, very popular books. And the idea of the books is that, or any reading list, is that when you are studying and you're coming to put your assignment together or your journal together, you can draw from the literature in your assignment, so you could quote it. That's the whole thing. You could quote, and you can say, "This is what I've experienced. This is what I understand as empathy, and this would be reflected by," and then you'd quote a section of the book and the author. And I'll share with you a bit of a tip, a good tip about actually reading lists and reading books. Whatever you do, don't think of them like the novel you might have taken on holiday, where you start at the beginning and you go at the end. Many books cover many topics. So if you are sort of reading a book on empathy, or you're studying empathy, then go to the back of the book, go into the list, the reference list at the back, and find empathy and read that section, because that's the section you're being asked to write the assignments on. Don't just happily come across it as you start at the beginning of the book and work your way through. So with academic books, they're academic reference books. So like with any reference book, you go to the back, you'd find the topic you're studying, empathy, or it could be counselling and law, or it could be whatever you're looking at, unconditional positive regard or ethics, and you go to that page, and then you go to that chapter in the book, and that's the chapter you should read. Don't waste time reading the entire book unless you're asked to. It would be my observation. It saves a lot of time. You can get to the crux of the matter, get to the meat on the bone, as they sometimes say.
And with that, Rory, so many academic books are not written in a way that it would be a page turner and a cover to cover read. They're not there to hook you and kind of travel you along a narration or a story. They're there to give you research and facts that have been found, so that you base your practice on them. That's why we reference them. We're referencing somebody else's work, and very often, I mean, you speak there about maybe empathy, Rory. You maybe covering empathy in your university, so you might go to the books, your recommended reading beforehand, go to the back, go to the index, look at where is empathy, and then go and read up a little bit on empathy in preparation before going in, and then maybe go and read up a little bit about empathy on coming out of your lecture, because most of the time your lecturers are going to be basing what they're teaching you, the slides that they put up and the lectures that they do, based on the recommended reading, because it's the research, it's the theory that underpins the practice that we do. And I know with my daughter, when she started in university and she got her recommended reading list, they were really thick books, Rory, lots of really thick books. And she felt overwhelmed because she felt that there was a requirement that she had to read all of these books and know exactly what was in these books. And you don't, you need to reference the books. And I have to say, Rory, there are some books that are a good read cover to cover as well, that you can actually read it and enjoy it and go, wow, I actually enjoyed reading the whole of that book. But yeah, definitely dip in, dip out when needed, because seeing the books as I have to read all of these can put up a barrier. It can lead to the books being pushed further and further away, and a feeling inside of, I haven't got the time with all my coursework and everything I'm doing to read these books in any depth. And it's a sad day, it really is, that when you come to write your assignment, it's the first time the book is opened. You almost want that when you come to write the assignment, you're opening the books, and this is the benefits of having your own books, and you're going over all the bits that you highlighted in preparation for your lessons and after lessons, or maybe what was said in a lesson by your tutor to be important. If you take one of these highlighter pens and highlight them, when you're going to your assignments, you're not seeing this information for the first time. You're revisiting it. And if you've made notes and you've highlighted some areas that are shown to be important, it makes life a lot easier, and it can take a lot of the anxiety from preparing for assignments out of the way, Rory.
Absolutely. And don't be worried if you go to the page in your book and you read it and you think, I just don't understand any of that. The way to frame that in your mind is, I don't understand any of that yet. Because what happens is that when you read it, things might not make any sense. It's only when you go to the lesson and you may do some skills practice, or you may talk with a peer, or the lecturer may deliver the lecture and discuss empathy or whatever you're studying in a different way, then you can go back to the book and it makes more sense. I think there are very few people. I'm sure there's some notable exceptions. There's very few people who go to study something for the first time, pick a book up, look at the reference text and go, oh yes, I fully understand it now. You may get a understanding or a flavour of it, but it does take quite a bit for the information to settle in. So be prepared for that. Don't worry if it doesn't go in the first time. Doesn't mean that you're not good enough. That's the process of learning. Learning is about repetition and about revisiting and looking and saying, well, it said this, but actually does it mean this? Or is this how I understand it? Checking it out. So don't run away from the books is what I'd say. Read them before your lesson, take your lesson, speak with your peers, then read them after, and eventually it will settle in. You'll look at it and you'll go, that really does make sense. But I can't tell you, Ken, over the years how many students I do are literally terrified of books.
Yeah. And I think that I may have found myself amongst them. And I look back to my journey through school, and there was the old reading out loud in front of the class back in my day. I'm dyslexic. It was a horrendous experience. It really was. I felt that I sounded not as developed as the other students, and it brought up all kinds of things inside me. And even today, when I look at a big thick book, I get a little twinge of anxiety. It's still there. It's still rooted in there, and it's like those relationships to books. And I guess what changed it for me was knowing that I don't have to read them cover to cover. That's really, really helpful. Knowing that I can highlight the bits that are important as I'm going through, because now I'm not just reading, I'm doing another activity. I'm actually highlighting what I think is more important. And that, for me, helped retain. And then, Rory, my secret weapon that I found, which was taught to me by my daughter, was little sticky notes. These little mini sticky notes that people put little notes on and dash around, and they can be all different colours. I had all different colours, and I'd stick them in the book, sticking out on the important parts. And I felt a sense of achievement that as I was coming through to write my assignments, I had little sticky notes sticking out just with what that topic was on it. And I could find the place in the book immediately, and I felt like I had it all together, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think you've just executed a heresy there, if I may say so, Ken. You talked about writing in books. When I was a child, defacing books was almost an executable offence. But academic textbooks, they're your books. You bought them with your money. I mean, obviously, if you got them from the library, I wouldn't recommend that you start using a highlighter pen in them. But if they're your texts, you go in and you highlight the text, you underline them in pencil, you put notes in the margins, because they are a study book. They're a tool. They're not something to be put on a shelf and polished with a duster. They're an academic tool to help you gain your qualification. So if you feel, I'm a great one for highlighter pens in books. Just get them. I go to the back of the book first. I look at the topic that I need to be studying. I'll then open it up maybe in the middle of the book, and then I'll start working my way through and just highlight stuff out or write notes in the margins. And I think Ken's wise observation on post-it notes are brilliant, because you can put a post-it note in and put yourself little tabs. You use the book to its fullest extent. Obviously, if you're getting out of the library, college or the university library, I wouldn't recommend writing. But I bet you that if you pick a book up out of the library, somebody will have put some pencil observations in. And the other big tip about books is, if you hold the spine in the palm of your hand, just get the book, hold the spine in the palm of your hand, you'll notice that the book opens, and that's usually where it's been most used. So open it there, and you may go straight to the information you need. I always do that. I pick a used book up, and I just look at where the pages are naturally opening, go straight there, and you'd be surprised, because if it's a curriculum that's being taught again and again and again, that chapter of the book or that part of the book will be read again and again and again. It'll be opened again and again and again. So that's a bit of a shortcut. It's like being back in college, isn't it, Ken? Talk about all these kind of study tips and student shortcuts. It's like your first day back.
It is, yeah. And I think we couldn't finish off the topic of reading lists without speaking. Well, you've kind of mentioned it now, Rory, that books can be costly. So generally, you'll be able to get some out of the library where you're studying. Again, maybe one of the disadvantages there is you don't want to be highlighting in those books. That's just not fair on those that come after you. But there are also second-hand books that you can pick up. And there's nothing wrong with certain second-hand books, but there are some second-hand books to maybe steer away from, and maybe not that they're second-hand, but there are certain books that need to be current, Rory. And I think we've spoken about it before. It's things like legislation, the ethics, those kind of things. You would want to be working on what is most recent. So you wouldn't want maybe a 10-year-old book on the law and ethics. Certainly here in the UK, the law has changed considerably over the last 10 years. Ethical guidelines with the ethical organizations have changed. The professional bodies have changed. So you want something that is a little more current there. But the theory, like you say, Rory, is the theory. So Carl Rogers' theory remains Carl Rogers' theory. Even if there's an update of the book, it still is theory.
Yeah, and usually when you buy an updated book, the update is somebody's written an introduction, so introducing the book. But you're absolutely right, Ken. Theory books, staying alive. When I was teaching, we'd what we call kind of prune the library every so often, which meant that I'd go down and remove books that were no longer useful. And the ones that I kind of removed were usually ethics, anything to do with legal information. And as codes of ethics change, the books that are written around the codes of ethics and explaining what they are, so a change as well. So you're absolutely right. You can buy books very inexpensively, on auction sites or in Facebook groups. But the ethics books or law books, best to buy brand new to be up to date. Yeah, because you don't want to be writing old stuff in your assignment, do you? That's the thing.
You don't, Rory. You
don't.
Told
it's out of date. You don't want to be doing that.
You don't indeed. Well, there you go. That is our student service, getting your reading list in order. I've had a good time today, Rory. I'm feeling all energized having come in and had a chat with you, Rory. And this has been episode 310 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and we're very grateful you joined us. The National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, or NCPS, proudly sponsor this podcast, supporting students every step of the way. Join the NCPS for resources, training, and a friendly, knowledgeable community to enhance your learning experience. Visit ncps.com.
We started off with ethical and sustainable practice, and we talked about relational depth, healing traumatised clients, the embodied process, and our part in that encounter. Practice Matters was an interview with Dr Sonja Falck, and she talks about the importance of personal development groups to a qualified practitioner. And then finally, in student services, Ken and myself meandered down memory lane, talking about getting your reading list in order. And finally, if you've enjoyed this episode and you enjoy the podcast, please pop a comment or a review on your favorite podcast app, be it Apple or wherever you listen. We really appreciate when people give us feedback, and it really cheers our day up. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.